Have you ever felt like you were right on the verge of a breakthrough, only to find yourself bombarded with tests, challenges, and obstacles? It feels like you've been waiting for a blessing, a moment of relief, or an answer to prayer, but instead, everything seems to fall apart. What if I told you that this period of testing is not a delay or a sign of failure, but rather part of God's divine plan for your life? Today, we're going to explore the profound truth that God will test you before your breakthrough. By the end of this message, you'll understand why testing is necessary, how God uses it to prepare you, and how you can endure and emerge victorious. Stay with me, because this journey will not only bring clarity, but also strengthen your faith in ways you never thought possible. First, let's address the elephant in the room. Why does God allow us to face trials and tests? If He loves us, why does He make things so hard before we receive the blessings we've been praying for? This is one of the most common questions believers wrestle with. To answer it, we need to dive into Scripture and see how testing has been part of God's plan since the beginning. In Proverbs 3:12 we are told, "For the Lord disciplines the one He loves, as a father the son in whom He delights." God's tests are not acts of cruelty, they are acts of love. Just as a loving parent disciplines their child to teach and guide them, God allows tests in our lives to refine us, to shape us, and to prepare us for the responsibilities and blessings that are ahead. Think of it this way: a piece of gold is only purified through fire. The impurities have to be burned away to reveal its true value. In the same way, God uses the heat of trials to purify our hearts and prepare us for His greater purposes. One of the clearest examples of this is the story of Abraham. In Genesis 22, God tested Abraham by asking him to sacrifice his beloved son, Isaac. It's hard to imagine a more difficult test of faith. But Abraham obeyed, trusting that God had a plan. And just as Abraham was about to sacrifice his son, God intervened, providing a ram in Isaac's place. This story isn't just about obedience, it's about trust. Abraham's faith was tested, and through that test, God revealed His provision and reaffirmed His promise to make Abraham the father of many nations. Abraham's breakthrough, the fulfillment of God's promise, came after the test. It's a powerful reminder that God's tests are never without purpose. They are a precursor to the greater blessings He has in store for us. But why is testing necessary before a breakthrough? Why doesn't God just give us the blessings without the trials? The answer lies in preparation. Before we can handle the responsibilities and rewards of a breakthrough, we need to be ready for them. Think of it like this: if you're not prepared for a blessing, it could overwhelm you, or worse, you could misuse it. Imagine giving a child the keys to a car before they've learned to drive. It would be dangerous. Similarly, God won't give us breakthroughs until we are spiritually mature enough to handle them. Let's look at the story of Joseph in Genesis 37-41. Joseph had a dream of greatness, a vision from God that he would one day rise to a position of authority. But before that dream was fulfilled, Joseph went through years of testing. He was sold into slavery by his own brothers, falsely accused by Potiphar's wife, and thrown into prison. It wasn't until after years of enduring these trials that Joseph's breakthrough came, and he became second in command in Egypt, saving an entire nation from famine. Joseph's story shows us that God's timing is perfect. His tests are not delays, they are periods of preparation. Joseph's years of testing prepared him to handle the responsibility and power that came with his breakthrough. But how can we recognize when God is testing us? Often, God's tests come in ways that challenge our faith, patience, obedience, and character. These tests might not be obvious at first, but they are opportunities for growth. Let's break down some of the most common ways God tests us and how we can endure these tests with faith and perseverance. One of the most challenging tests is the test of faith. This is when God asks us to trust Him, even when our circumstances seem impossible. Think of Peter walking on water in Matthew 14:29-31. Peter had the faith to step out of the boat, but when he saw the wind and waves, his fear caused him to sink. Even in that moment of doubt, Jesus reached out and saved him. This story teaches us that God often tests our faith in moments of uncertainty. He calls us to trust Him, even when we can't see the way forward. And when we falter, He is there to lift us up. Another common test is the test of patience. In today's fast-paced world, we are conditioned to expect instant results. But God's timing is often very different from ours. He doesn't work on our schedule, and this can be incredibly frustrating. However, God's delays are not His denials. Look at the story of Sarah and Abraham in Genesis. God promised them a child, but they had to wait for years before that promise was fulfilled. In the meantime, they faced moments of doubt and impatience. But when Isaac was finally born, it was clear that God's timing was perfect. The waiting period was a test of their patience and trust in God's promises. The test of obedience is another critical one. Sometimes God asks us to step out in faith and obey His commands, even when it doesn't make sense. Think of Noah in Genesis 6. God instructed him to build an ark, even though there was no immediate sign of rain or flood. Noah obeyed, and his obedience led to the preservation of humanity during the flood. When we obey God, even when it seems irrational or inconvenient, we position ourselves for the breakthrough He has planned for us. Then there's the test of character. This is when God allows circumstances that reveal and refine our inner selves. These are often the most painful tests because they expose areas of weakness that we may not want to confront. Daniel's test in the lion's den, Daniel 6, showed his unwavering faith and integrity, which ultimately led to a public testimony of God's power. Tests of character often come when we are faced with moral or ethical choices. How we respond reveals the depth of our trust in God and prepares us for greater responsibilities in His kingdom. Now that we've identified some of the ways God tests us, let's talk about how to endure these tests. James 1:2-4 tells us to consider it pure joy whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. But how do we find joy in the midst of trials? It starts with perspective. When we understand that tests are part of God's refining process, we can approach them with hope, knowing that our perseverance will lead to growth and maturity. One of the best ways to endure tests is by holding on to God's promises. Throughout the Bible, we are reminded of God's faithfulness and His plans for us. Jeremiah 29:11 says, "For I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." When we hold on to these promises during testing, we can have confidence that God is working behind the scenes, even when we can't see it. Prayer is another crucial tool for enduring tests. Philippians 4:6-7 encourages us to pray in all circumstances, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds. Prayer not only brings peace, but also strengthens our connection with God, helping us stay focused on His purpose during difficult times. Surrounding ourselves with fellow believers is also essential. Hebrews 10:24-25 reminds us not to give up meeting together, but to encourage one another. Having a community of faith can make all the difference when you're going through trials. They can remind you of God's goodness and help lift you up when you feel weak. Finally, trust in God's timing. Psalm 27:14 says, "Wait for the Lord, be strong, and let your heart take courage." While we may not understand why a test is happening or how long it will last, we can trust that God knows exactly when to bring about the breakthrough. As we look at Scripture, we see that nearly every major figure went through a period of testing before their breakthrough. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness before leading the Israelites out of Egypt. David was anointed king, but spent years on the run from Saul before ascending to the throne. Even Jesus was tested in the wilderness before beginning his ministry. Each of these tests had a purpose. They refined and prepared these individuals for the incredible work God had planned for them. Remember, your test is not a sign of failure or punishment. It's a sign that God is preparing you for something greater. So, don't give up. Stay faithful, stay patient, and stay obedient. Your breakthrough is coming.